The obsidian monolith stood 3 kilometers tall, its surface reflecting nothing not the twin suns of Kepler 442b, not the storm clouds gathering overhead, not even the faces of the humans who had spent 18 months trying to understand it. Dr. Vex Cortland pressed her palm against the alien metal, feeling the subtle vibration that had haunted her dreams since discovery. Still nothing on the scans, muttered her research partner, Dr. Kane Torvin, adjusting the quantum resonance array for the 1000th time. His weathered face bore the marks of too many sleepless nights and too much synthetic coffee. It's like the damn thing exists in a permanent state of flux. Every time we think we mapped its structure, it shifts. Captain Ryden Ashworth watched from the command bunker, his augmented eye tracking the energy readings scrolling across multiple displays. The military escort had been his idea 18 months ago, when they'd first detected the structure's impossible energy signature from orbit. Now he wondered if a single battalion would be enough. The Velter delegation arrives in 6 hours, Ashworth announced, his voice cutting through the humid air. Their High Chancellor was very specific about human activities near the gate. Vex turned from the monolith, her dark eyes flashing with frustration. Activities. We're conducting legitimate xenoarchaeological research. This structure predates their civilization by millennia. They call it the Morning Gate, Ashworth replied, grimly. According to their historical records, the last species to tamper with it ceased to exist 3,000 years ago. The Velter have classified it as a Class Omega restricted site. Kane's laugh held no humor. Restricted by whom? We found it. We claim salvage rights under the Terran Colonial Charter. The Velter can file a complaint with the Admiralty through the bunker's reinforced windows. They could see the alien structure's impossible angle seeming to bend space around them. The gate, as the human team had dubbed it, defied every known law of physics. Its material registered as both solid and liquid. Its temperature fluctuated between absolute zero and stellar core heat within nanoseconds, and its electromagnetic signature suggested it was simultaneously generating and consuming energy equivalent to a small star. Dr. Cortland, came a voice from the communications array, Lieutenant Zaranexis, the team's xenolinguistics expert, looked pale as she monitored the long-range sensors. I'm picking up Velter battlecruisers dropping out of hyperspace. 12 vessels, heavy configuration. Vex felt her heart rate spike. The Velter were an ancient species, masters of biotechnology and spatial manipulation. Their ships were grown rather than built, living creatures the size of city blocks with weapons that could restructure matter at the molecular level. Humanity had maintained an uneasy peace with them for 2 decades, but territorial disputes were common. Incoming transmission, Nexus announced. The holographic display shimmered to life, revealing the elongated, crystalline features of High Chancellor Murthic Vel. His species' natural bioluminescence pulsed in patterns that Vex had learned to recognize as extreme agitation. Humans. The alien's translated voice carried undertones of barely contained panic. You must cease your investigations immediately. The Morning Gate is not a relic to be studied. It is a prison, a warning, a monument to the folly of curiosity. Captain Ashworth stepped forward. Chancellor, with respect, this structure lies within our established research zone. We've followed all protocols. Protocols? Murthic S form flickered with bioluminescent fury. Your species' arrogance will doom us all. The gate was sealed by the ancients themselves, locked away from those who would repeat the mistakes of the Kethmarin. You have no comprehension of what lies beyond that threshold. Vex moved to stand beside the captain. Then help us understand. Share your historical data. Work with us instead of threatening us. The Velter leader's response was immediate and chilling. The Kethmarin thought the same. They were explorers, scientists, driven by the same insatiable hunger for knowledge that defines your kind. When they opened the gate, their screams echoed across 17 star systems before silence fell forever. The transmission cut abruptly, leaving the humans staring at empty air. Outside, the gate continued its slow, impossible rotation, and somewhere in the distance, thunder rolled across the alien sky like the footsteps of approaching gods. Kane broke the silence first. So they're afraid of what's inside. Vex nodded slowly, her scientific curiosity warring with a growing sense of dread. The question is, should we be? The Velter strike came at dawn, their bioships descending through Kepler 442b's atmosphere like living meteors. Captain Ashworth watched through his command bunker's tactical display as 12 organic vessels, each pulsing with bioluminescent veins, took defensive positions around the research site. They're not attacking, observed Lieutenant Nexus, her fingers dancing across the sensor array. There, surrounding us. Containment protocol. Ashworth muttered. He'd seen this before during the Rigel incident. The Velta were preparing to quarantine the entire area. All personnel to defensive positions. Dr. Cortland, Dr. Torvin, whatever you're planning to do with that gate, now might be the time. Vex was already at her mobile laboratory, frantically calibrating the quantum resonance drill. 18 months of study had revealed one crucial fact. The gate responded to specific harmonic frequencies, not the simple electromagnetic pulses they'd tried initially, but complex quantum resonance patterns that seemed to unlock some kind of recognition protocol. The frequency cascade is almost ready, she called out, sweat beading on her forehead despite the morning chill. If I'm right about the harmonics, we should be able to establish a connection, maybe even partially activate the gate systems. Kane looked up from his position at the structural analysis station. And if you're wrong, then we find out what scared the Kethmaran. A new voice cut through their preparations, the translated tones of High Chancellor Murthic. Broadcast from the lead bioship. Final warning, humans, power down your equipment and prepare for evacuation. We will not allow you to repeat the ancient catastrophe. Captain Ashworth activated his external communication array. Chancellor, we're conducting legitimate scientific research. Stand down your vessels. You do not understand. The alien's bioluminescent panic was visible even through the holographic display. The gate is not locked to keep intruders out. It is locked to keep something in. The ancients sacrificed entire worlds to seal away what the Kethmaran released. Your primitive science cannot comprehend. The transmission died. As Vex activated the quantum resonance drill, the effect was immediate and terrifying. The obsidian monolith, silent for 3 millennia, began to sing. The sound was felt rather than heard, a vibration that seemed to emanate from the very atoms of matter itself. Across the research site, sensitive equipment exploded in showers of sparks. Several soldiers dropped to their knees, clutching their heads as the alien harmony invaded their neural pathways. But the gate was responding. Ancient symbols flared to life across its impossible surface, writing themselves in languages that predated human civilization. The structure's rotation accelerated, space around it beginning to warp and twist as massive energies built toward some unknown threshold. My God, whispered Dr. Torvin, staring at his readings. The power output is off the charts. It's drawing energy from, I don't know where, another dimension, parallel universe, above them. The Velter bioships began to retreat, their bioluminescent hulls pulsing with what could only be described as terror. Chancellor, Ashworth shouted into his communicator. What's happening? What are we seeing? Murthic's response came through heavy with the weight of millennial dread. The awakening begins, just as it did for the Kethmaran. First the songs, then the whispers, then the screaming. You have doomed us all. The gate's singing grew louder, more complex, as if multiple voices were joining some cosmic choir. Dr. Cortland watched her instruments register impossible readings. Temperatures that should have turned matter to plasma. Gravitational fields that defied physics, and underneath it all, something that her equipment couldn't classify. Movement. Something was stirring behind the gate's obsidian surface. Vex, Kane's voice was tight with fear. Look at the deep-skin results. There's something on the other side. Something massive. She turned to his display and felt her blood freeze. The quantum resonance drill had penetrated perhaps a millimeter into the gate's structure, but that tiny breach had revealed what lay beyond. The scanner showed a vast space, not empty void, but something writhing, shifting, alive with malevolent intelligence. Cut the power, she whispered. What? Cut the power, she screamed, lunging for the emergency shutdown. But it was too late. The gate had tasted freedom for the first time in 3,000 years, and the quantum harmonics had already established a resonance lock. The ancient symbols blazed brighter, and through the small breach in reality, something began to push back. The obsidian surface bulged outward like skin stretched over something trying to break free. Captain Ashworth watched in horror as hairline cracks appeared in the supposedly indestructible alien metal. All units, fall back to perimeter positions, he ordered, his voice steady despite the terror building in his chest. Dr. Cortland, please, tell me you have a way to reverse this. Vex stared at the gate, watching reality itself begin to fray around its edges. I don't think the ancients locked this to keep something in, she said quietly. I think they locked it to keep something from coming back. The cracks in the gate widened, and for just a moment, something vast and hungry pressed against the Barrier from the other side. In that instant, every human on the planet heard the same sound of whisper in a language that predated speech, promising things that the human mind was never meant to contemplate. Then the first seal broke, and the real nightmare began. The first creature to emerge from the gate defied description in any human language. It wasn't so much seen as experienced a writhing mass of angles that hurt to perceive, tentacles that existed in more dimensions than human eyes could process, and a presence that made reality itself recoil in revulsion. Private Martinez was the first to die. The thing simply looked at him, and his molecular structure forgot how to maintain cohesion. He dissolved into component atoms with a sound like wind chimes made of screaming. Fall back. ALL units fall back. Captain Ashworth's voice cut through the chaos as his soldiers opened fire with everything they had: plasma rifles, quantum disruptors, even old-fashioned kinetic rounds. Nothing seemed to affect the entity, as it flowed through the widening breach like liquid nightmare. Dr. Vex Cortland grabbed her emergency kit and ran for the backup laboratory, her mind racing through every theoretical framework she'd ever studied. Behind her, Lieutenant Nexus was screaming coordinates into the communication array, calling for immediate orbital support from the human fleet. The resonance field is still active. Kane shouted over the sound of reality tearing. It's drawing more of them through. The quantum drill, designed to probe the gate's secrets, had become a beacon calling to things that should never have been wakened. Through the expanding breach, more entities were pressing forward, each one unique in its impossibility, all of them sharing the same hungry malevolence. The second creature that emerged had too many eyes, arranged in patterns that formed words, in languages that predated thought. Sergeant Reeves took one look at it and began clawing at his own face, trying to gouge out the images that were now permanently burned into his visual cortex. The thing fed on his terror, growing larger with each scream. Conventional weapons are useless, Ashworth reported to Orbital Command. Request immediate nuclear strike on our position. The response came back within seconds. Negative. Ground team, Civilian Research Station Kepler-7 is 30 kilometers from your position. Fallout would be catastrophic. Above them, the Velter bioships had formed a defensive perimeter, but they weren't firing at the emerging entities. Instead, their weapons were trained on the human positions. Chancellor Murthick, we need your help. Vex shouted into the communicator as she reached the backup laboratory. Your people must have some way to contain these things. The alien's response was barely coherent through his species' panic induced by illuminescence. There is no containment. The Kethmaran learned this truth too late. The entities are not from another place, they are from before place, before time. Before the laws that govern reality, a third creature emerged. This one resembling a geometric impossibility that sang in frequencies that caused nearby matter to spontaneously rearrange itself. Corporal Davies was caught in his song for less than 3 seconds, before his body became a living equation, his screams taking mathematical form. Dr. Torvin was frantically working at the quantum resonance controls, trying to reverse the harmonic sequence that had opened the breach. The field is self-sustaining now, he yelled. It's drawing power from the entities themselves. Vex reached her emergency equipment and activated the experimental containment field generator, a prototype based on theoretical physics that she'd hoped never to test. The field sprang to life around the immediate area, creating a barrier of twisted space-time. For a moment, it worked. The fourth entity to emerge, a mass of living shadow, with eyes like dying stars, struck the containment field and recoiled with what might have been surprise. It's holding, Keen shouted triumphantly. His celebration was premature. The shadow thing studied the containment field for perhaps 5 seconds, then reached out with one impossible appendage and began to unravel the physics that made the barrier work. The equations that defined the field's existence simply stopped being true. As the containment field collapsed, Vex heard High Chancellor Murthick's voice one final time. The Velter fleet is retreating to minimum safe distance. We will maintain position for 1 solar cycle, then implement final protocol. May your species find peace in extinction. The communication cut out as the Velter bioships began their withdrawal, leaving the humans alone with the consequences of their curiosity. Captain Ashworth gathered his remaining forces, less than half his original battalion, in the ruins of what had been their command bunker. Around them, reality continued to fray as more entities poured through the gate. Each new arrival brought its own flavor of impossibility, its own method of making the universe forget its fundamental laws. Sir, whispered Corporal Kim, the only survivor of Third Squad, what are our orders? Ashworth looked at the expanding breach, at the entities that were beginning to spread outward from the gate site, consuming everything in their path. In the distance, he could see the lights of Kepler-7 research station, home to 3,000 civilian scientists and their families. "We hold this position," he said quietly, "no matter what comes through that gate. It doesn't get past us." Dr. Cortland overheard and laughed a sound devoid of humor or hope. "Captain, these things don't follow the laws of physics. They don't even acknowledge the concept of space as we understand it. How exactly do we fight enemies that exist in dimensions we can't perceive?" Before Ashworth could answer, the fifth entity emerged from the gate, and this one was different. Where the others had been chaotic, alien, impossible to comprehend, this one had a terrible intelligence. It regarded the humans with something approaching amusement, then spoke in a voice that bypassed their ears entirely, implanting words directly into their consciousness, children of a young species. It said, each word dripping with contempt, "That spanned geological ages, you have opened the way for us once more, as the Kethmaran did in their arrogance, as countless others have done across the eons. You cannot imagine the gift you have given us or the price your reality will pay." The entity gestured with an appendage that existed in 7 dimensions simultaneously, and every electronic device within 50 kilometers simply ceased to function, not destroyed, just forgotten by the universe, as if they had never been created. In the sudden silence that followed, Captain Ashworth raised his sidearm, an old-fashioned kinetic weapon that required no electronics, and fired 6 rounds directly at the entity's center mass. The bullets passed through without effect, but the thing paused and regarded him with something like curiosity. "Interesting," amused. "Even facing annihilation, your species chooses defiance over submission. This will make your extinction memorable." Captain Ashworth's bullets hadn't harmed the entity, but they had given Dr. Vex Cortland an idea that was either brilliant or completely insane. She grabbed Kane by the shoulder as they crouched behind the twisted remains of their equipment. "The bullets passed through," she whispered urgently, "but they passed through in normal space. These things exist in multiple dimensions simultaneously. What if we force them to choose just one?" "How the hell do we do that?" Kane hissed back, watching as the intelligent entity gestured again, and 2 more soldiers simply stopped. "Existing dimensional anchor fields. We've got the equipment in Lab 7. It was designed for hyperspace navigation calibration. But if we modify the quantum resonance frequency," she was already moving, crawling through the rubble toward what remained of their research facility. The entity seemed to notice their movement and turned its attention toward them. The learned ones scurry like insects seeking shelter from the storm. "How amusing. Did you think your primitive understanding of dimensional physics would—" Its monologue was interrupted by a rocket-propelled grenade that Sergeant Torres fired from 50 meters away. Like the bullets, the explosive passed harmlessly through the creature, but the detonation scattered debris that struck it from multiple angles simultaneously. For the first time, the entity showed something like annoyance, crude but persistent. It mused, then raised what might have been a hand. Torres began to scream as his body was restructured from the inside out, his bones becoming crystalline, his flesh transforming into something that pulsed with unnatural geometry. But his sacrifice had bought Vex precious seconds. She reached Lab 7 and began frantically rewiring the dimensional anchor ray, her hands moving with desperate precision. As she rerouted power from the backup generators, "Dr. Cortland," came Captain Ashworth's voice over the short-range radio, "whatever you're planning now would be good. We've got 17 entities through the gate and counting. They're heading toward Kepler-7. Through the lab's cracked window, Vex could see the nightmare parade. Each entity was unique in its impossibility, geometric nightmares that folded space around themselves, writhing masses of living equations, shadows that consumed light itself, and leading them all was the intelligent one, the thing that had spoken to them with such ancient contempt. "Kane, I need you to create a resonance feedback loop in the gate's quantum field," she called out as she worked. "Maximum power, all frequencies that could destabilize the entire dimensional matrix," he protested. "We could tear a hole in space-time itself." "These things already did that," she snapped. "We need them focused on one location, one dimension, where we can actually fight them." Behind them, the sounds of battle intensified. The remaining human forces had fallen back to a defensive perimeter around the research station, using everything from plasma rifles to improvised explosive devices. Nothing seemed to harm the entities directly, but concentrated fire could sometimes disrupt their movement patterns, force them to redistribute their dimensional presence. Private Chen had discovered that thermobaric grenades produced interesting effects, not damage, but temporary confusion as the pressure waves interacted with the entity's multi-dimensional forms. She was methodically lobbing explosives while muttering what sounded like prayers. In 3 different languages, Field Generator is online, Vex announced, her hands shaking as she made the final connections. Kane, on my mark, the intelligent entity suddenly appeared inside the lab, having bypassed the walls entirely by existing partially outside normal space. Up close, Vex could see that it wasn't simply alien, it was antithetical to existence itself, a walking contradiction that caused reality to develop stress fractures wherever it moved. Clever little primate, it said, its voice causing the lab equipment to vibrate in resonance patterns that spelled out words of power in dead languages. You think to bind us to your fragile dimension. The Kethmaran attempted the same strategy. Their cities became monuments to their failure, twisted spires of impossible architecture where geometry itself screams in eternal agony. It reached toward Vex with an appendage that existed in more dimensions than her mind could process. But before it could touch her, Dr. Torvin activated the feedback loop. The effect was instantaneous and catastrophic. Every entity within a kilometer radius suddenly found itself yanked into normal 3-dimensional space, their multi-dimensional nature compressed and constrained by the dimensional anchor field. The intelligent entity let out a sound that no human throat could produce, a howl of rage and agony that shattered every piece of glass in the facility. For the first time since emerging from the gate, the entities were vulnerable. Captain Ashworth didn't waste the opportunity. All units, concentrate fire. Hit them now. The battle that followed was unlike anything in human military history. The entities, constrained to normal space, but still possessing their alien intellects and powers, fought with desperate fury. The intelligent one gestured, and Private Chen's weapon turned into a writhing serpent that began consuming her from within. Corporal Davis fired a plasma burst and a geometric nightmare, only to watch his beam curve back through dimensional space and strike himself. But for every impossible countermeasure the entities deployed, human ingenuity found a response. When conventional weapons proved ineffective, the soldiers switched to impact rounds designed to cause massive structural damage. When direct attacks failed, they began targeting the ground beneath the creatures, collapsing sections of the research facility to create barriers and choke points. Lieutenant Nexus, working from the communications bunker, discovered that certain radio frequencies caused the entity's visible distress. She began broadcasting at maximum power, creating sonic patterns that disrupted their dimensional coherence even further. The cost was horrific. In the span of 20 minutes, Ashworth's battalion was reduced to less than 30 soldiers each. Casualty was a masterwork of alien cruelty, bodies transformed into impossible shapes, minds rewritten by exposure to truths that human consciousness was never meant to process. But they were winning. The dimensional anchor field was holding, trapping 17 entities in normal space where human weapons could actually affect them. And with each passing minute, Vex was fine-tuning the frequency patterns, making the constraints tighter, more absolute. The intelligent entity, its form now fully compressed into 3 dimensions, turned its alien attention toward the source of its torment. You will pay for this indignity, it promised, its voice now possessing merely normal levels of reality warping power. We are eternal. We are inevitable. We will. Its threat was cut short by an anti-tank missile that Sergeant Williams fired from point-blank range, constrained to normal space. The entity discovered that it could indeed be harmed by sufficient explosive force. It staggered backward, ichor that violated several laws of chemistry pouring from what might have been wounds. That's for Private Martinez, you dimensional bastard, Williams snarled, loading another rocket. The entity's response was immediate and terrible. It gestured with its remaining appendages, and Williams began to age rapidly, decades passing in seconds as his life force was consumed. But even as he died, he managed to fire his second rocket. The explosion caught the intelligent entity's center mass, and for the first time since emerging from the gate, it screamed in something approaching genuine pain across the battlefield. The tide was turning. 17 impossible entities were discovering the harsh reality of 3-dimensional existence, where mass had momentum, where energy had limitations, where even gods could bleed. But the gate was still open, and more shadows were gathering beyond. The breach, the dimensional anchor field, had trapped 17 entities in normal space. But the gate continued to pulse with malevolent energy. Dr. Vex Cortland watched her readings with growing horror as dozens more shapes pressed against the breach from the other side. "The field is destabilizing," she shouted to Captain Ashworth over the sound of plasma fire and inhuman screaming. "Every entity we force into normal space creates quantum friction. We can't maintain containment much longer." The intelligent entity, wounded but far from defeated, had rallied its companions into something resembling military formation. Where before they had moved chaotically, driven by alien instincts, now they coordinated their attacks with terrifying efficiency. The geometric nightmare mass of impossible angles that hurt to perceive directly created a barrier of twisted space-time while the shadow entity began consuming the light around human positions. Working in concert, they had turned the battlefield into a maze of darkness and spatial distortions. "Squad leaders, sound off," Ashworth commanded, ducking as a lance of pure entropy missed his head by centimeters. "Third squad reporting. 7 effectives remaining." Sergeant Williams' voice was steady despite the fact that his left arm was aging backwards, growing younger, while the rest of his body continued normally, a side effect of his close encounter with the intelligent entity. "Fifth squad. 3 soldiers operational." Lieutenant Torres sounded exhausted. His unit had been holding the western approach, using improvised barriers and explosive charges to channel the entities into kill zones. "Medical team here. We've got 14 wounded, but..." Dr. Elena Vasquez's voice trailed off. "How did you treat soldiers whose DNA had been rewritten by exposure to impossible mathematics, whose wounds existed in dimensions human medicine couldn't access?" The creature that Vex had privately dubbed the Equation chose that moment to demonstrate why conventional tactics were insufficient. It sang a note that caused the molecular bonds in nearby concrete to rearrange themselves into recursive patterns. The research station's outer wall became a living fractal, expanding and contracting in rhythms that matched the heartbeats of everyone watching. Private Morrison, caught too close to the transformation, began laughing as his skeletal structure tried to achieve mathematical perfection. His bones stretched and twisted into impossible configurations, each crack and snap precisely calculated to create geometric harmony. The laughter continued even after his vocal cords should have been destroyed. "We need to change tactics," Ashworth announced grimly. "Standard engagement protocols aren't working." "Dr. Cortland, can you modify the anchor field? Make it more aggressive?" Vex was already working on the problem, her hands flying over what remained of her equipment. "I can increase the dimensional compression, but it'll require massive power inputs. We need to drain everything: life support, communications, even the backup generators." "Do it," Ashworth ordered without hesitation. The decision cost them immediately. As the base's power grid diverted to feed the dimensional anchor ray, the defensive systems failed. Automated turrets went silent, protective barriers collapsed, and the facility's atmospheric processors stopped functioning. But the effect on the entities was dramatic. The increased dimensional compression forced them deeper into normal space, making them more vulnerable to conventional weapons, while simultaneously causing them obvious distress. The intelligent entity doubled over as if in pain, its form becoming more solidly three-dimensional with each passing second. "Now," Ashworth roared, "hit them with everything we've got." The remaining human forces opened fire with coordinated precision, plasma rifles designed for anti-armor work, quantum disruptors meant to disable starship shielding, explosive rounds that could crack battleship hulls. All of it concentrated on 17 entities that were discovering the harsh limitations of existing in only 3 dimensions. The battle became a slaughter, but not the one-sided massacre the humans had expected. The shadow entity proved that, even constrained in normal space, it could still manipulate darkness as a weapon. Corporal Kim screamed as her own shadow detached from her body and began attacking her with claws made of crystallized light absence. She managed to destroy it with a thermobaric grenade, but the effort left her a hollow shell, literally shadowless under the alien sun. The Equation creature retaliated by singing a harmony that caused metal to remember it had once been ore. Every weapon, every piece of equipment, every structural support beam in the immediate area began attempting to return to its pre-refined state. Sergeant Davis watched his plasma rifle melt back into constituent metals, while his armor tried to become crude iron. Lieutenant Nexus, still coordinating from the communications bunker, discovered that certain mathematical constants could disrupt the Equation creature's songs. She began broadcasting prime number sequences at maximum power, creating interference patterns that caused the entity visible distress. "The math doesn't like math," she reported with grim satisfaction, hitting it with abstract number theory, but their victories came at a terrible cost. Private Rodriguez was caught in a spatial distortion when the geometric nightmare tried to escape. The dimensional anchor field. His body was twisted through 4 dimensions simultaneously, creating a human pretzel that somehow remained conscious and screaming. The intelligent entity, now forced into a roughly humanoid shape by the anchor field's pressure, had learned to use conventional physics as a weapon. It gestured at a pile of rubble, calculating trajectory and momentum with impossible precision. It sent shrapnel flying at supersonic speeds. 3 soldiers died instantly, their bodies perforated by stone, fragments moving faster than bullets. Field strength at 92% and falling, Vex reported, sweat streaming down her face as she fought to maintain the dimensional compression. "The quantum substrate can't handle this much distortion. We're literally tearing holes in local space-time." As if summoned by her words, reality hiccup. For a split second, the laws of physics forgot to function properly. Gravity reversed itself, time flowed backward, and the electromagnetic spectrum inverted. In that moment of cosmic confusion, 2 more entities slipped through the gate. These newcomers were different, smaller, more focused, and terrifyingly practical. Where the first wave had been cosmic horrors that violated reality through their mere existence, these new arrivals seemed designed for warfare. They moved with purpose, coordinating their attacks, learning from their predecessors' mistakes. The first of the new entities resembled a living weapon of biomechanical horror that fired projectiles existing in 7 dimensions simultaneously. The second was worse, a creature of pure malevolent intelligence that began systematically analyzing human tactics and developing countermeasures. Captain Ashworth realized with growing dread that they were facing something like an invasion force. The first entities had been scouts, explorers, random monsters that had wandered through the opening. These new arrivals were soldiers. "All remaining units, consolidate around Lab 7. He ordered. "We make our stand around the dimensional anchor. If that falls, everything falls." As his soldiers began their fighting withdrawal, Ashworth caught sight of the gate through the smoke and chaos. More shapes were gathering beyond the breach, dozens of them, maybe hundreds, all waiting for the dimensional anchor field to fail, for the way to be opened fully. Behind him, Private Chen was emptying her last magazine into the weapon entity, her shots somehow finding their mark despite the creature's multi-dimensional nature. She was laughing as she fired, the sound carrying both triumph and madness in equal measure. "Come on, you bastards," she screamed. "We opened your fucking door. Now let's see if you can handle what's on this side." The weapon entity's response was to fire a projectile that existed in negative space, a bullet made of absence itself. Chen dodged, barely, and the round punched a hole through reality that revealed the swirling chaos beyond them. Gate. Through that brief window, Ashworth caught a glimpse of what was really coming. Not just entities, but armies. Not just monsters, but an entire civilization of beings that existed to unmake reality itself. They had perhaps minutes before the dimensional anchor failed completely, minutes before the real invasion began, and somewhere in the distance, he could still hear the desperate screams of the Velter Chancellor. Final protocol activated. "May the galaxy forgive us for what we must do." The dimensional anchor field was failing in spectacular fashion, reality stuttering like a broken hologram around Lab 7. Dr. Vex Cortland's hands were bleeding from gripping the control interfaces as quantum feedback surged through the system, but she refused to let go. Each time the field wavered, more entities pressed against the gate from the other side. "Field integrity at 6 to 7% and dropping," she reported through gritted teeth. "I count at least 40 more entities queued beyond the breach. The moment this field collapses, we're facing an army." Captain Ashworth surveyed his remaining forces, 11 soldiers, to scientists, and 1 very determined communications officer, against 19 entities already in normal space, with 40 more waiting, and God knew how many behind them. The odds should have been insurmountable. But humans had never been particularly good at accepting impossible odds, sir. "Lieutenant," Nexus called from her communications array. "I'm reading massive energy buildup from the Velter fleet position. They're charging something big, the intelligent entity. Its form now uncomfortably solid in 3-dimensional space. Seemed to sense the same thing. Its alien features contorted into what might have been concern as it turned toward the sky. The coward spawn prepare their ultimate sanction." It spoke, its voice causing nearby electronics to spark and fail. "They would rather sterilize this entire system than risk our expansion." How perfectly typical of the lesser races. Dr. Kane Torvin looked up from his position behind a barricade of twisted metal. Ultimate sanction. What's it talking about? Ashworth felt ice form in his stomach. He'd heard rumors, classified reports about Veltra weapons that could delete matter from existence. At the quantum level, system killer, he whispered. They're going to Nova the Star. They can do that. Vex asked. Horrified. Stellar compression bomb, Ashworth confirmed grimly. Force the star to collapse and then explode. Destroys everything within 10 light years, including whatever's coming through that gate. The equation creature chose that moment to demonstrate why humanity's last stand might be irrelevant. It sang a note that caused the quantum anchor field to resonate in harmony, accelerating its decay. The field's strength dropped to 40% in seconds. That's it, Vex announced with deadly calm. The field's going to collapse in less than 3 minutes. After that, every entity waiting beyond the gate comes through at full multi-dimensional capacity. Sergeant Williams, his aging arm now completely withered, raised his rifle with his good hand. Then we kill as many as we can in 3 minutes. The weapon entity responded by firing a salvo of impossible projectiles bullets that existed in negative space, rounds that traveled backward through time to hit their targets before being fired. Ammunition that redefined the local laws of physics to ensure maximum lethality. Private Chenda behind what remained of a concrete barrier as a time-reversed bullet struck the spot where she'd been standing. The impact created a causality loop that made her briefly exist in the same location as her own past self, an experience that left her screaming in languages that wouldn't be invented for another 1,000 years. But even as reality warped around, then the human soldiers adapted. They learned to fight enemies that existed in multiple dimensions, creatures that violated physics as a matter of course, entities that could rewrite the laws of nature with a gesture. Lieutenant Torres discovered that fragmentation grenades were surprisingly effective against the geometric nightmare. The creature's impossible angles couldn't process multiple simultaneous impacts from different vectors, causing its dimensional matrix to stutter and fail. The bastards are still vulnerable to good, old-fashioned overwhelming firepower, he reported, with grim satisfaction, loading another grenade into his launcher. Dr. Vasquez, the team medic, had abandoned any pretense of conventional treatment. Instead, she was using her medical knowledge to identify weak points in entities that shouldn't have had. Anatomy, the shadow creature, she realized, was bound by thermodynamic laws. Even when manipulating darkness, it had to draw energy from somewhere. Target the heat signatures, she called out, pointing her medical scanner at the writhing mass of living shadow. It's stealing thermal energy from the environment. Disrupt the heat flow. Corporal Kim, despite being shadowless and suffering from temporal displacement syndrome, managed to rig a series of heating elements around the shadow entity's position. When activated simultaneously, they created competing thermal gradients that caused the creature to convulse in apparent agony. The intelligent entity watched these tactical adaptations with something approaching respect, fascinating, amused, even as Sergeant Davis's plasma fire carved chunks from its increasingly solid form. Your species learns quickly. The Kethmer required centuries to develop effective countermeasures. You have achieved the same in mere hours. We're fast learners, Ashworth replied, emptying his magazine into the creature's center mass. And we're stubborn as hell. Field strength at 25%, Vex reported. Through the failing barrier, they could see dozens of entities pressing against the gate, their forms becoming clearer as the dimensional anchor weakened. That's when Lieutenant Nexus made a discovery that changed everything. Captain, she called from her communications station. I've been monitoring the quantum resonance patterns from the gate. The entities, they're not just coming through randomly. They're following specific harmonic frequencies, like a song. Vex looked up from her failing equipment. A song? The same frequencies that opened the gate in the first place. Nexus continued urgently. Dr. Cortland, what if we could reverse the harmonic sequence? Instead of opening the gate wider, could we close it? The intelligent entity's attention snapped toward the communications array. Impossible, it said, but there was uncertainty in its translated voice. The pathways between dimensions cannot be sealed from your side. The ancients required technologies beyond your comprehension. The ancients weren't human. Vex interrupted, her mind racing through quantum mechanical equations. Kane, the resonance drill. If we reverse the polarity and feed it through the dimensional anchor ray, W. E need massive power inputs, Kane protested, more than we have available. Dr. Vasquez looked up from her improvised thermal trap. What about using the entities themselves as a power source? They're generating massive energy fields just by existing in our dimension. The weapon entity seemed to understand the implications of their conversation. It fired a cluster of projectiles designed to destroy the remaining equipment, but Private Chen intercepted them with her own body, using her temporal displacement to exist in multiple moments, simultaneously, and absorb the impacts across several timeline iterations. She collapsed, her form flickering between past and present versions of herself. But her sacrifice bought them precious seconds. "Do it," Ashworth ordered. "Whatever it takes. Close that gate." Vex began frantically rewiring the dimensional anchor ray, converting it from a containment field into a resonance amplifier. "I need someone to maintain fire on the entities. Keep them distracted while I—" Her words were cut off as the field's strength hit 15%, and 3 more entities burst through the gate. These were different again, pure manifestations of entropy that began systematically unmaking everything they touched. Metal rusted into dust, concrete crumbled to sand, and the very air started to lose its molecular cohesion. 10% field strength, Vex announced, her fingers dancing over controls that were beginning to dissolve under the entropy entities. Influence, the intelligent entity raised what might have been its hand, preparing to deliver a final blow that would end the human resistance permanently. But before it could strike, the stellar compression bomb reached critical mass. High Chancellor Murthik's voice echoed across all frequencies. Final protocol initiated. Star collapse in 60 seconds. May the cosmos forgive us for what we have done. Far above, Kepler for 42 star began to convulse as exotic matter was injected into its core. The stellar fusion process stuttered, gravity fluctuated, and reality itself prepared for an explosion that would sterilize the entire system. 59 seconds, Vex said quietly, still working on her modifications. Not much time to save the universe. The intelligent entity looked toward the sky, then at the failing gate, then at the handful of humans who had somehow managed to wound it, despite their primitive technology. "Your species," it said with something like admiration, "is absolutely insane." Captain Ashworth smiled grimly as he loaded his last magazine. "Yeah, we get that a lot." With 58 seconds until stellar collapse, Dr. Vex Cortland made the most important decision in human history. Instead of trying to close the gate gradually, she reversed the polarity on every piece of equipment simultaneously and fed the combined energy output directly into the dimensional breach. The effect was immediate and catastrophic. The gate, which had been slowly widening for the past hour, suddenly began contracting with violent force. The quantum harmonics that had called to entities across dimensional barriers now screamed in reverse, creating a vortex that pulled everything back toward the breach. The intelligent entity realized what was happening a split second too late. "No," it roared, its voice causing nearby reality to crack like glass. "You cannot seal the pathway from this side. The mathematics are impossible. Humans," Captain Ashworth replied, emptying his final magazine into the creature's increasingly solid form. "Don't give a damn about your mathematics." The first entity to be caught by the reverse gate was the shadow creature, its form, already weakened by Dr. Vasquez's thermal disruption, stretched and distorted as it was pulled inexorably toward the contracting breach. It fought against the dimensional current, trying to anchor itself to normal space. But the gate's hunger was now greater than its resistance. With a sound like reality tearing, the shadow entity was yanked through the breach and disappeared into whatever hell lay beyond. 45 seconds to stellar collapse, Lieutenant Nexus reported, her voice steady despite the chaos around them. "Vex, whatever you're doing, it's working." The equation creature tried to counter the gate's reverse polarity by singing harmonics, designed to stabilize dimensional barriers. But its mathematics had been developed for entities that existed naturally in multiple dimensions, applied to a human-built quantum resonance system. The equations produced paradoxes that made the creature's own form unstable. Dr. Kane Torvin, blood streaming from his ears, due to exposure to impossible mathematics, managed to target the equation creature with the last functional plasma rifle. His shots disrupted the creature's song at critical frequencies, causing it to falter in its stabilization attempts. The geometric nightmare was the next to fall. Its impossible angles, which had allowed it to exist partially outside normal space, became liabilities as the gate's pull increased. Unable to maintain structural coherence across multiple dimensions simultaneously, It collapsed into a more conventional three-dimensional form, which immediately made it vulnerable to conventional weapons. Sergeant Williams, his withered arm, now completely useless, drew his sidearm with his good hand and put 6 rounds into what might have been the creature's center mass. The geometric nightmare convulsed, its angles becoming acute, then obtuse, then simply gone. 30 seconds. Nexus called out. The weapon entity fought hardest against the dimensional pull, using its biomechanical nature to anchor itself to the physical world. It extended tendrils into the ground, the walls, even the molecular structure of the surrounding air, trying to create enough connection points to resist the gate's hunger. But Private Chen, flickering between multiple timeline iterations due to her temporal displacement, managed to exist in the same location as several of the creature's anchor points simultaneously. The paradox this created was enough to disrupt the entity's grip on reality. With a shriek that sounded like metal being torn apart at the quantum level, the weapon entity was pulled into the gate and vanished. The intelligent entity was the last to fall, even as the dimensional vortex pulled at its increasingly solid form. It continued to fight with desperate cunning. It began consuming its own fallen companions, absorbing their essence to increase its own mass and resistance to the gate's pull. It's trying to make itself too heavy for the dimensional current, Vex observed, her hands still working frantically to maintain the reverse resonance field. 20 seconds. And I don't think the gate's pull is strong enough. Captain Ashworth looked at his last functional piece of equipment, a single frag grenade with a quantum charge, designed for breaching starship hulls. He'd been saving it for a last-ditch effort against multiple entities. But now he had a different idea. Hey, he called to the intelligent entity, which was growing larger and more solid with each passing second. You said humans were insane, right? The creature turned its alien attention toward him, perhaps curious about final words or a last desperate plea. Ashworth smiled, pulled the pin from the grenade, and held it tight against his chest as he charged directly at the entity. You have no idea. The explosion caught both of them at the center of the dimensional vortex. The quantum charge disrupted local space-time just as the gate's pull reached maximum intensity. The intelligent entity, its mass suddenly distributed across 17 different dimensional states simultaneously, lost all coherence and was yanked through the breach in pieces. Captain Ashworth was pulled along with it, but in his final moment, he saw something that made him laugh despite the approaching obliteration. The gate was closing. Vex's impossible plan had worked. 10 seconds to stellar collapse. Nexus reported, but the gate was already contracting to a pinpoint. The quantum harmonics finally achieving the resonance lock that would seal the breach permanently. The last few entities waiting beyond the barrier were cut off mid-manifestation, their forms severed by the closing dimensional gap. With a sound like the universe itself sighing in relief, the gate sealed completely. The obsidian monolith stood, silent and inert, its surface once again reflecting nothing. 5 seconds. High above, the Velter stellar compression bomb reached critical threshold. But with the gate closed and the dimensional breach sealed, there was no longer any multi-dimensional contamination to worry about. Chancellor Murthick, monitoring from his bioship, made a command decision that saved 7 star systems. The compression bomb was redirected at the last possible moment, its exotic matter payload jettisoned into empty space where it detonated harmlessly between stars. Dr. Vex Cortland collapsed over her equipment, finally allowing herself to feel the exhaustion and terror she'd been suppressing for the past hour. Around her, the surviving members of the research team in military escort slowly emerged from cover. Lieutenant Nexus began taking roll call. Dr. Cortland, responsive. Dr. Torvin, wounded but stable. Dr. Vasquez, responsive. Lieutenant Torres. Sound off. The count was sobering. Of the original 47 human personnel at the research site, only 12 had survived. But they had closed the gate. They had prevented an invasion that would have consumed reality itself. 3 days later, the Velter delegation arrived, not with warships, but with medical vessels and construction equipment. High Chancellor Murthick himself came aboard the human research station, his bioluminescent form pulsing with what xenolinguists recognized as profound respect. "We owe your species an apology," he said through the translation matrix. "For 20,000 years, the Velter have maintained vigilance over sites like this one, waiting for other races to make the same mistake as the Kethmarin. We expected to find corpses in cosmic horror. Instead, we find that humans did what We thought impossible closed a fully open gate through pure stubborn ingenuity. Dr. Cortland, her hands still bandaged from quantum feedback burns, looked up from her preliminary report. We nearly didn't make it. If Captain Ashworth hadn't, your captain sacrificed himself to save not just your species, but reality itself. Berthic interrupted gently. The Velter Conclave has voted unanimously to erect a monument in his honor. More importantly, we wish to share our historical archives with humanity. Perhaps together, we can ensure that such gates remain sealed. Dr. Torvin, his left arm in a support brace, managed a weary smile. Just promise us one thing, Chancellor. Next time we find something ancient and mysterious, maybe give us a heads up before we start poking it with quantum drills. The Velter leader's bioluminescence shifted to what appeared to be amusement. We will provide complete warnings, Dr. Torvin, though given what we have observed of human nature, I suspect you will attempt to study such artifacts anyway. Lieutenant Nexus, still monitoring communications from her station, looked up with a grin. He's not wrong. I've already got requests from 3 universities wanting to examine the sealed gate. Vex laughed the first genuine laughter any of them had shared since the crisis began. Absolutely not. Some doors should stay closed. But even as she said it, she was taking notes on the dimensional resonance patterns they'd observed. The scientific applications were staggering. Faster than light communication, instant transportation across galactic distances, technologies that could revolutionize human civilization. The gate was sealed, the entities banished, and reality was safe for now. In her private log that evening, Dr. Cortland wrote, Captain Ashworth was right. Humans are absolutely insane. We see a door marked "Do Not Open," and our first instinct is to find a bigger crowbar. It nearly killed us all. It cost us friends, colleagues, heroes, and God help me, I'm already wondering what other doors are out there waiting to be opened. But next time, and there will be a next time, we'll be ready. We'll have Velter historical data, better equipment, and most importantly, we'll remember what Captain Ashworth taught us. When the universe shows you something impossible, you don't back down. You find a way to make it possible. That's what humans do. That's what makes us dangerous. That's what makes us magnificent. That's what makes us human. The sealed gate stood silent in the alien sunset, its obsidian surface once again reflecting nothing. But deep within its quantum structure, theoretical models suggested faint traces of human technology remained embedded in the dimensional locks. Future archaeologists would find those traces someday. They would study them, analyze them, try to understand how a primitive species had accomplished what advanced civilizations thought impossible. And when they did, they would learn what the Velter had learned, what the entities beyond the gate had learned, what every challenge in humanity's path would eventually learn. Never underestimate a species that responds to impossible with "Hold my beer and watch this." The universe was vast, ancient, and full of wonders that could destroy civilizations with a thought, but it had never encountered anything quite like humanity. And now it never would be the same.